They thought they were protecting their family fortune from a nobody. They handed me a legal document, a pen, and a look of pure disgust. What they didn't know was that the pen I used to sign their little postnup cost more than their entire house. They wanted to ensure I never touched a cent of their money. Little did they know, I was already the one keeping their world spinning. Silence has a weight. It's heavy, cold, and in the Rose household, it usually smelled like expensive mahogany and arrogance. I sat at the long dining table, my hands folded neatly in my lap. Opposite me sat Catherine Rose, my mother-in-law, a woman who wore her pedigree like armor. Beside her was Julian, my husband, who looked everywhere except at me. Catherine didn't offer tea, she offered a folder. "It's a postnuptial agreement, Lily," she said, her voice like cracking ice. "We've watched your spending. We've watched how you've settled into this life of luxury. It's time we set some boundaries. We need to protect the Rose legacy from outside interests." I looked at the document. It was a standard gold digger's trap. If Julian and I divorced, I would walk away with exactly zero. No alimony, no assets, not even the jewelry I was wearing. "Outside interests?" I asked softly. "Let's be blunt," she snapped, leaning forward. "You came from nothing, a small-town girl with a basic degree and a quiet job. You married into one of the most powerful families in the tech sector. We want to ensure you stay for the man, not the bank account." I looked at Julian. "Is this what you want?" He finally met my eyes, but there was no fire there, just a weak, apologetic shrug. "It's just for peace of mind, Lily. Mom is just worried about the estate. If you love me, the money shouldn't matter, right?" I almost laughed. If only they knew. To the Roses, I was Lily Rose, the quiet wife who spent her days at art galleries and charity meetings. They thought my modest background meant I was desperate for their status. They had no idea that Lily Rose was a professional ghost. Under my maiden name, Lily Thorne, I sat at the helm of Thorne Global, a $4.1 billion empire that didn't just compete with the Rose family's firm, it practically owned the infrastructure they built on. I wasn't just rich. I was the market. "I'll sign it," I said. The relief on Catherine's face was almost pathetic. She pushed a fountain pen toward me. I recognized it. A limited edition Mont Blanc. I had the same one, but mine was a custom build, a gift from a head of state. I signed the papers with a steady hand. "There," I said, sliding the folder back. "The Rose legacy is safe from me." "Good," Catherine smirked, signaling the maid to finally bring tea. "Now that we've cleared the air, maybe you can finally start acting like a Rose instead of a guest." I smiled, a real, genuine smile. "Oh, I plan to. In fact, I think it's time I took a much more active interest in the family business. I hear the board of directors is having a crisis meeting tomorrow regarding the new acquisition." Catherine laughed, a sharp, condescending sound. "Don't bother your head with that, dear. That's for the men and the women with actual experience. You just focus on the garden party." I stood up, smoothing out my silk dress. "You're right. Experience is everything." As I walked out of the room, my phone vibrated in my pocket. It was a text from my lead strategist at Thorne Global. "The Roses are desperate. They've missed their quarterly targets again. They're begging for a buyout. Should we crush them or buy them?" I typed back a simple reply. "Make them wait. I want to see how they handle a little poverty first." That night, Julian tried to be affectionate. He talked about a new yacht he wanted to buy. He talked about our future. But as I lay in the dark, listening to him breathe, I realized the postnup wasn't just a document. It was my exit strategy. They wanted to make sure I couldn't take their money. They never realized I was the only thing stopping the world from taking theirs. The next morning, I didn't go to the garden party. I put on a tailored suit, grabbed my encrypted laptop, and headed to a high-rise building that didn't have the Rose name on it. The security guards bowed as I entered the private elevator. The top floor belonged to me. My assistant Marcus met me with a stack of files. "The Rose Group is officially underwater, ma'am," he reported. "If Thorne Global pulls the server licensing today, they go dark by midnight. Their stock will hit the floor." "And the board?" I asked. "They're terrified. They don't know who the primary shareholder of Thorne is. They think it's a hedge fund in London." I sat in my leather chair, looking out over the city. Call a meeting. Invite the Rose Board. Tell them the owner of Thorne Global wants to meet them in person to discuss the restructuring of their debt. Will you be attending as yourself? Marcus asked, a hint of a smile on his face. Oh, absolutely, I said. I want to see Catherine's face when she realizes the gold digger just bought her house. The boardroom of Thorne Global was a masterpiece of glass and cold steel, overlooking the heartbeat of the city. I arrived early. I didn't sit at the head of the table. I sat in the shadows of the corner lounge, sipping a coffee that cost more than Julian's monthly allowance. At exactly 10 o'clock in the morning, the doors swung open. In walked the Rose family hierarchy. Julian was there, looking pale and clutching a leather briefcase. His father, Arthur, looked like he hadn't slept in a week. And Catherine walked in like she still owned the world, though the way she gripped her handbag told a different story. Where is he? Catherine demanded, looking at Marcus. We were told the owner of Thorne Global would be here personally. We don't have time for middlemen. Our firm is facing a liquidity crisis because of your licensing fees. Marcus remained expressionless. The owner is in the room, Mrs. Rose. They all turned, scanning the room. Their eyes passed over me once, twice, and then stopped. Julian's jaw literally dropped. Lily? What are you doing here? Did you follow us? This isn't the place for family drama, honey. Go home. Catherine rolled her eyes. For heaven's sake, Lily, did you think this was a gallery opening? Marcus, please remove this girl so we can speak to your boss. I stood up slowly, the heels of my shoes clicking sharply against the marble floor. I walked to the head of the table and pulled out the heavy executive chair. I didn't sit. I leaned on it, looking directly at Catherine. The chair is quite comfortable, Catherine, I said, my voice calm and devoid of the sweet daughter-in-law tremor I usually faked. Though I doubt you'll be sitting in one like it for much longer. Arthur Rose frowned, his eyes narrowing. Lily, what is the meaning of this? The meaning, I said, sliding a tablet across the table toward him, is that you are currently standing in my building. Thorne Global isn't a hedge fund. It's me. I built it from a dorm room project into a $4.1 billion empire while you were busy teaching Julian how to pick the right color for a polo shirt. The silence that followed was deafening. I watched the color drain from Catherine's face. It was a slow, satisfying fade from arrogant pink to ghostly white. That's impossible, Julian whispered, stepping forward. You're a librarian's daughter. You shop at sales. You drive that old sedan. I drive that sedan because I like the engine, Julian, and I shop at sales because I know the actual value of $1. Something you've never had to learn, I countered. But let's talk about that postnup you made me sign yesterday. The one that says I have no claim to the Rose legacy. I looked at Arthur. Your company is built on Thorne's proprietary API. Without it, your software is a brick. I've decided to terminate your license effective immediately. Since I have no interest in your family fortune, I see no reason to keep subsidizing it. Arthur collapsed into a chair. Lily, please. That would bankrupt us. Thousands of employees, our family name. You should have thought about the family name before you treated me like a stray cat looking for a handout. Catherine finally found her voice, though it was shrill and desperate. You can't do this. You're married to my son. This is marital property. I tilted my head, smiling. Actually, Catherine, check the laws on pre-existing assets. And more importantly, check that postnup you were so proud of. It works both ways. You legally separated our finances entirely. You made sure I couldn't touch your money. But you also ensured you and your son have absolutely no claim to mine. I leaned in closer to her. You played yourself. Julian looked at me like he was seeing a stranger. For the first time in our marriage, he realized he wasn't the protector. He was the liability. Lily, we can talk about this, Julian pleaded, reaching for my hand. I stepped back. We are talking, Julian. This is a business meeting, and as the CDO of Thorne Global, my first order of business is to acquire the Rose Group for pennies on the dollar. I'll keep the employees. I'll keep the infrastructure. And us? Julian asked. I picked up my phone. You have the Rose legacy. I hope it keeps you warm. Because according to the papers I signed yesterday, that's all you're getting from me. They have 24 hours to vacate the corporate offices. As they were ushered out, Catherine turned back, her face twisted in a mix of rage and regret. You're a monster, Lily. No, Catherine. I called out as the glass doors began to slide shut. I'm just an outside interest taking care of business. I sat down in my chair and took a deep breath. The air felt lighter. But as I looked at the digital clock on the wall, I knew this was just the beginning. Breaking them was easy. Replacing the life I thought I had, that was going to be the real challenge. The silence in my office after they left was the loudest thing I had ever heard. For 3 years I had played a role. I had been the supportive wife who nodded at dinner parties and ignored the subtle jabs about my simple upbringing. Now, the mask was off, and the reality was cold. I didn't go home to the Rose estate that night. I stayed at my penthouse. I spent the evening watching the news as the Rose Group's stock plummeted into the abyss. By 8 p.m., the headlines were screaming, "Rose Empire crumbles. Secret tech giant Thorne Global pulls support." My phone was a war zone of missed calls and frantic texts. Julian, Arthur, and even cousins I had met only once were blowing up my screen. But there was one message that stood out. It wasn't a plea for money or an apology. It was a photo from Catherine. It was a picture of my packed suitcases sitting on the curb in the rain, outside the Rose Mansion. Underneath she wrote, "You might have the billions, but you'll always be trash to us. Don't ever come back." I stared at the image. It didn't hurt the way she wanted it to. It felt like a graduation. The next morning I arrived at the Rose Group headquarters. Not as a guest, but as the new owner. I bought the majority shares for a fraction of their value, while the market was in a panic. When I walked through the lobby, the staff was in a state of shock. The security guards, who used to barely give me a nod when I dropped off Julian's forgotten lunch, now stood at attention. I headed straight for the executive floor. I found Julian in his office, staring blankly at a bottle of scotch. He looked up, his eyes red and hollow. "You really did it," he whispered. "You destroyed us in less than 24 hours. "I didn't destroy you, Julian," I said, sitting across from him. "Your family's arrogance did. I just stopped holding up the floor. You guys were living on a mountain of debt and ego. I just showed you where the ground was." "What happens now?" he asked, his voice cracking. "The company is mine. I'm restructuring. I'm keeping the talented people, the ones your father ignored, and I'm clearing out the dead weight. Which brings me to your resignation." I placed a single sheet of paper on his desk. Julian laughed bitterly. "You're firing your own husband?" "I'm firing the vice president who hasn't looked at a balance sheet in 6 months," I corrected him. "As for being my husband, that's a different contract. One that I think we both know is broken." He looked at the resignation letter, then back at me. "Was any of it real, Lily? The last 3 years? Or was I just a project for you? A way to keep an eye on the competition?" I felt a pang of something. Maybe regret, maybe just nostalgia. "I loved you, Julian. I really did. I was waiting for the right time to tell you everything. I wanted us to be a team. But every time I tried to open up, your mother would make a comment about my place, and you would just sit there. You let them treat me like a servant with a ring. You chose their approval over my respect." "I was trying to keep the peace," he yelled. "No," I said, standing up. "You were trying to keep your inheritance, and now you have neither." As I turned to leave, the office door burst open. Catherine was there, her hair disheveled, looking nothing like the polished queen of Peshawar society I had known. "You think you've won?" she hissed, pointing a trembling finger at me. "We'll sue. We'll tell the world you manipulated the market. We'll drag your name through the mud until Thorne Global is a joke." I didn't even blink. "Go ahead, Catherine, but before you call your lawyers, you might want to check who owns the firm you're planning to hire. I bought their parent company this morning, and as for the mud, I've spent my whole life building a reputation. You spent yours building a facade. Let's see whose name survives the headlines." I walked past her, but she grabbed my arm. Her grip was desperate. "Lily, please," she whispered, her voice suddenly dropping the rage. "Arthur's heart, he can't take this. The house is collateral. We have nowhere to go." I looked down at her hand on my sleeve until she let go. "There's a small apartment in the city. It's modest. It's what you thought I deserved when we first met. I've paid the rent for 6 months. After that, I suggest Julian finds a job that actually requires him to work." I walked out of the building and into the sunlight. For the first time in years, I didn't have to check if my behavior was Roseworthy. I was Lily Thorne, and I was just getting started. For the next week, I lived in the eye of the storm. The news cycle was obsessed with me. I was being hailed as a shadow queen and a corporate assassin, but inside the walls of Thorne Global, it was just business. I was busy salvaging the jobs of 3,000 employees who had done nothing wrong except work for a family of ego-driven amateurs. But being the winner had a strange aftertaste. Every time I walked into the Rose Group offices, now rebranded as Thorne Rose Systems, I saw the empty space on the wall where Arthur's portrait used to hang. I had won the war, but the battlefield was a ghost town. Late Thursday night, Marcus walked into my office. He looked concerned. "Ma'am, Julian is downstairs. He's been sitting in the lobby for 3 hours. Security wants to know if they should remove him." I looked at the clock. It was nearly midnight. "No, send him up." Julian walked in looking like a shadow of the man I had married. His expensive suit was wrinkled, and the arrogance that used to define his posture was gone. He didn't look like a prince anymore. He looked like a man who had finally realized the world didn't owe him a living. "I went to the apartment," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "The one you paid for. My mother she's not taking it well. She spent the last 2 days screaming at the walls because the countertops are marble." "And Arthur?" I asked. "He's quiet. He just sits by the window. I think he's ashamed, Lily. Not of losing the money, but of how he treated the person who actually saved us." I leaned back in my chair. "Why are you here, Julian? If you're here for a loan, the answer is no. If you're here to ask for your job back, the answer is also no." "I'm not here for money," he said, stepping closer to the desk. "I'm here because I found something. While we were packing up the house, I found a box in the attic. It belonged to my grandfather, the man who actually started the Rose Group before my father turned it into a country club." He placed a weathered, leather-bound ledger on my desk. "I read it," Julian continued. "He knew. He wrote about how the family was becoming obsessed with status over substance. He even wrote a note in the back, a sort of prophecy. He said that one day the Roses would be saved by someone they didn't think was good enough for them. He said that person would be the true heir to the legacy, regardless of their bloodline." I opened the ledger. The ink was faded, but the words were clear. It was a blueprint for a company built on integrity and hard work. The very things I had built Thorne Global on. "I realized something tonight," Julian said, his eyes welling up. "I wasn't just a victim of my mother's personality. I was a participant. I liked the comfort more than I liked the truth. I let them treat you like that because it was easier than standing up for you. I'm sorry, Lily. I know it doesn't fix the billions or the lawsuits. I am so incredibly sorry." For the first time since this whole mess began, I felt a crack in my armor. I looked at the man I had shared a bed with for years. I saw the regret, and for once it looked real. It wasn't the "I lost my money" regret. It was the "I lost you" regret. "Apology accepted, Julian," I said softly. "But it doesn't change the ending. You can't unsign that Postnup, and I can't unsee the person you were when you thought I was nothing." "I know," he nodded. "I'm leaving. I took a job at a logistics firm, entry level. I'm going to start over, away from my mother's voice and my father's shadow." He turned to leave, but stopped at the door. "One last thing. Catherine is planning something. She's been talking to a journalist from a tabloid. She's trying to sell a story that you stole the Thorne technology from Arthur's private files years ago. She's desperate enough to lie under oath." I felt a cold chill. Catherine wasn't just losing gracefully. She was trying to take my reputation down with her, even if it meant perjury. "Thanks for the heads up," I said. As the door closed behind him, I looked at the ledger again. My phone rang. It was my legal team. "Ma'am, we have a problem. A major news outlet just received an anonymous tip with forged documents claiming intellectual property theft." I stood up and looked out at the city. Catherine Rose wanted to play dirty? Fine. I had been building an empire in the shadows for a decade. She was about to find out exactly what happens when you try to blackmail a woman who owns the very ink you're using to write your lies. The air in the press conference hall was thick with anticipation. Catherine Rose sat in the front row, wearing her last designer suit like a battle flag. She had a smug, predatory look on her face. Beside her sat a lawyer known for high-profile character assassinations. They thought they had trapped me. They thought their forged documents would turn my $4.1 billion empire into a legal crime scene. I walked onto the stage, but I didn't bring a lawyer. I brought a tablet and a small vintage flash drive. Before we take questions regarding the allegations made by Mrs. Rose, I began, my voice amplified and steady. I want to share a little history. Catherine claims I stole the core code for Thorne Global from her husband's private files during our first year of marriage. Catherine nodded solemnly for the cameras, wiping a fake tear. The problem with that lie, I continued, is that the Thorne algorithm was time-stamped and encrypted 3 years before I even met Julian. It was registered in a blind trust under my name while I was still in college. I tapped the tablet, and the massive screens behind me displayed the original digital certificates. The dates were undeniable, but I wasn't done. However, I said, looking directly at Catherine, let's talk about actual theft. While preparing our defense, my team did a deep dive into the Rose Group's offshore accounts. We found that someone had been siphoning millions from the company pension fund for years to cover personal shopping debts and social expenses. The room went deathly silent. I switched the slide. It showed a series of wire transfers, all signed with Catherine's digital signature. You didn't just try to frame me, Catherine. You spent your own employees' retirement money on diamonds and status. You didn't hate me because I was trash. You hated me because you were terrified I'd eventually look at the books and see who you really were. The cameras swiveled toward Catherine. The predatory look was gone, replaced by a mask of pure terror. Her lawyer leaned away from her as if she were radioactive. I'm not filing for defamation, I said to the crowd. The authorities have already been notified about the embezzlement. As the new owner of the Rose Group assets, I will be personally replenishing the pension fund. The Roses, however, will be busy with a different kind of paperwork. I walked off the stage as the room erupted into chaos. 6 months later, the dust had finally settled. Catherine was facing a lengthy sentence, and Arthur had retired to a quiet life in the countryside, away from the scandals. Julian was still working his entry-level job, living in a small studio, learning for the first time what it meant to earn a life. I sat in my office at the top of the Thorne Rose building. I had dropped the Rose name. It was just Thorne Global now. I picked up the fountain pen, the one I had used to sign that Postnup all those months ago. I looked at the document one last time before feeding it into the shredder. They wanted to protect their legacy from a gold digger. In the end, I was the one who saved the innocent people they had stepped on. I didn't need their name, their money, or their approval. I had my own crown, and it wasn't made of gold. It was made of the grit they thought I lacked. I looked out at the horizon. The sun was setting over the city, and for the first time in my life, there were no secrets. Just the empire I built, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing exactly what I was worth. Where are you watching this video from, and at what time? Let me know in the comments. Was Lily right to expose Catherine's crimes, or did she go too far by destroying the family name?